There's little doubt that arcane damage has been a net positive effect overall for the game of Flesh and Blood. From a flavor and lore standpoint, it brings the equivalent of magic, an important piece of any fantasy genre, to the game. And from a mechanics standpoint, it prevents the game from getting overly one-dimensional. That said, nearly all of us have been the subject of an arcane beatdown, sitting and watching helplessly as our opponent does action after action with no interaction opportunity as the damage total accumulates, or has had to sit dumbfounded as their opponent revels in Runeblade into Rosetta, coming in for an obscene amount of mixed damage. So despite the fact that overall, arcane damage is mostly balanced, it's easy at times to feel that arcane damage isn't quite fair. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my Flesh and Blood friends. Welcome back to Dice Commando and Go Again, a fabulous cast. Thanks so much for tuning in today for a discussion around arcane damage and how, even though it fits well into the game, both lore-wise and mechanically, and it has its spot, it does sometimes lead to feel bad scenarios. And why is that? And then, does anything need done about it? Now, I've actually had this cast ready to go for a while, kind of waiting for the right time to have this discussion, because these discussions seem to come up every so often, and more recently through the Kano thing, right? So let's ask ourselves, as players, if we understand that arcane damage is balanced within the overall game, why does it still make us feel bad? And I believe it's because one of the most attractive features of Flesh and Blood is that in its core design, James White was able to tackle two major TCG pitfalls. First being the mana screw or mana flood issue, and next the dead draw problem. Nearly every card in this game can be used for multiple functions. Pitch to create resources, play it for its intended purpose, or simply use it as a block to reduce damage taken. Wait, what about me? Well, okay, maybe not you, Gorganian Tome, sorry, but for the rest, they serve multiple purposes, albeit perhaps less efficiently. In Welcome to Rathe, Fab's debut set, drawing a handful of red pitch cards probably meant that your options were limited. Your attacks might look great, but without the pitch, you might have to give up too much in card economy to pay for them. But the fact that those cards could also be used to block means that you aren't completely dead in the water, and also allows for turnover of your hand. Sure, it was an undesirable draw, but it didn't leave you stuck. Block out, arsenal on your turn, and draw up a new hand. A bad draw could shift momentum, sure, but it didn't translate to a complete loss of opportunity value. And therein was a fundamental agreement of sorts to Flesh and Blood players, a minimization of the bad draw issue. But then came Arcane Rising, and along with it, the arcane damage mechanic. This magical attack of sorts differs greatly in that it's blocked not by the inherent defense on our cards, but rather the pitch value of those cards. And this is perhaps the primary reason why arcane damage can, at times, feel unfair. Whereas with normal physical attacks, there's the built-in push-pull that largely doesn't throttle. With arcane damage, you can, at times, find yourself nearly helpless. See, arcane damage allows the bad draw problem back into the game, and when one of the features that fundamentally attracted players to the game in the first place is compromised, one can certainly acquiesce how it can lead to overall feel-bad moments. Because this goes beyond simply build your deck the right way, or get good noob. Even guardians like Bravo, who run what can sometimes feel like a surplus of blue pitches, do, occasionally, draw all red hands. And if that matches with a Kano who's ready for their combo, well, here comes the burn, baby. The next part of this discussion lies in the difference in valuation between arcane and physical damages. In order to even have the ability to mitigate arcane damage, heroes must bring Arcane Barrier to battle. Generally, this is through the equipping of Arcane Barrier via their valuable equipment slots. And because Arcane Barrier, or AB, is not globally present on equipment, it often forces suboptimal choices, which can serve to slow down a hero's strategy. In fact, to this day, there are still some classes that don't have class-specific equipment with AB. Additionally, the fact that the amount of AB equipped caps the amount of arcane damage that can be mitigated facilitates the constant potential of guaranteed chip damage, which in of itself also carries value. As such, the mere character of being an arcane-capable hero brings an inherent and non-obvious value advantage to the match before it even begins, just by being who and what they are. Now, as a mechanical counter to this advantage, arcane damage has two balancing factors. First, the cards used to mitigate incoming arcane damage are non-permanent. as opposed to a card used to block a physical attack, which blocks and then goes to the graveyard. Cards pitched to AB return to the bottom of the deck. Second, arcane damage lives on a lower power to resource curve. Flesh and Blood has a clearly established 0-4, 1-5, 2-6, 3-7, and so on curve for physical damage. By contrast, arcane damage follows a base 0-3, 1-4, 2-5 curve. Straight arcane damage cards rarely exceed this 5 cap, as an additional balance given the AB equipment slot concerns. Now, because of these two balancing checks, arcane damage is valued lower than physical damage, living somewhere around the 0.75, 0.8, or 0.85 range. And this becomes clear in a comparison of Revel and Runeblood and In the Swing, each from the Everfest expansion, and thus designed in similar life stages of the game. Both cards require a condition to have been met in order to play, which means that other cards were needed previously, and both cards cost 0. Revel produces 4 instances of 1 arcane, In the Swing produces 3 physical damage in the reaction phase. It's clear that there is a valuation difference between the two damage types, yet one results in the loss of 4 life, whereas the other only 3 life. And this of course generates another point of contention. Despite the inherent mechanical valuations, facing down a Revel and Runeblood feels far, far worse than getting surprised with an over-the-top In the Swing. In the Swing can be blocked with 1 card, albeit a reaction. Revel is, best case, a 2-card net with, hopefully, floating resources for the pending Rosetta attack. And speaking of Rosetta, it's another solid example of the manifestation of these valuation differences. A weapon that made 2 separate physical attacks for 1 resource would likely have never made it off the design table. But because of the lower valuation of arcane damage, combined with the conditional effect of Rosetta, it was deemed okay for release at the time. The final piece of this puzzle lies in the associative pairing of arcane damage with the wizard class, whose class identity is one of off-turn play. A fundamental mechanic of the wizard class is the ability to play on the opponent's turn, waiting until the opponent has overcommitted themselves and then striking. Because this strike happens in the form of arcane damage, it's easy to associate arcane as the reason, whereas, in reality, it's actually tied to being wizard's class identity. The wizard ability to pair 2 of their turns back-to-back into one of the opponent's turns is an incredibly powerful mechanic in this game. Because remember, one of the fundamental tenets of Flesh and Blood is the push-pull. Drop at the end of your turn, then the cards you don't use defensively on your opponent's turn are there for you to go offensive with during your turn. Fab 101. Trade cards or health to maximize your overall value. But the wizard 2 to turn 1 sequencing breaks this agreement. And never was this made more apparent as to its power than by Michael Hamilton's run with the Icelander-Boltyn build that won Worlds in 2022. Coming for a 3-7 physical attack with a 3-card hand, leaving 1 for Arsenal, either pushes damage or strips cards. And normally this is where it would end, but with wizards they're able to draw up and then unleash another full hand to come at you again. And no matter the defensive decisions made, if you spin cards offensively, it leaves you open to arcane assault while exposed. The only true protection is to not attack, which of course doesn't win games. Now hey, part of what makes the wizard class both exciting and appealing to its fans is how they're able to bend the normal patterns of the game. Bending rules in exciting and balanced ways is one of the coolest design aspects of these type of games. But there's no denying that the evolution of the 2-to-1 turn play pattern has become extremely powerful when easily repeatable. And of course, when something that plays outside the fundamental rules crosses the too strong line, whatever that may mean for each individual player, it certainly can lend itself to feel-bad type scenarios. Now sure, arcane damage math, so to say, is relatively easy to keep in check. By staying within the established 0-3, 1-4, 2-5 curve and simultaneously capping base arcane damage generation to 5, the mechanic can easily stay in line with established balance. But the reduction of the repeatable dual-turn opportunities available to Wizard, I believe, is crucial to keeping the mechanic where it is. While Stormstriders has certainly been responsible for countless gotchas in its time, as a consumable one-time use, it brings it down to, typically, being useful only for a kill shot, which in of itself means that there is a play around, keeping life, making Stormstriders not a fundamental problem. And thus, it's the repeatability of the 2-turn potential that must be kept in check. Icelander was an indication of that. Yes, her frostbites were tough, but it was ultimately her ability to, in the Boltyn type build, create damned if you do, damned if you don't situations constantly that led to the emotions that it did. So in closing, I want to reiterate how important the concept of arcane damage is for this game, not just mechanically, but also for flavor. Furthermore, being able to bend the rules of the game is kind of what we try to do in these games, and it makes the game fun. And as long as those mechanics bend but don't break, we'll continue to be in a great spot. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and go Commando.